Good morning, Foundry friends, and welcome to another time of Wandering Toward Wonder. This is a time each week that we set aside to think about the ways that we're cultivating wonder and joy and hope in our lives. My name is Will Ed Green. I serve as one of the pastors and the director of discipleship at Foundry, and I'm so excited to be with you today. I'm tuning in this morning from a different location. You may notice my background has changed. I am at Foundry today as we make preparations for our Good Friday service. And so I'm glad to have you with me today. I would love to know where it is that you're joining in from as you join in. And so as you come into the call today, let us know where you're wandering in from so that we can celebrate your presence with us. And as you see the names and faces of people that you recognize, we invite you to greet them too. Over this last couple of weeks, we've had the really distinct honor of being able to welcome voices from our congregation and community who help us think critically and creatively about the theme that we've been focused on during this season, the theme of lament and what it means to lament as Christians in a way that empowers us for deeper discipleship as we are on the discipleship journey. And so today I am really, really excited to welcome my good friend and colleague, Dr. Izetta Autumn Mobley. Izetta serves as a member of our discipleship ministries team. She's been a part of our Journey to Racial Justice team. She leads our Sacred Stitchers group, which has made just oodles of masks for us. And we're so grateful for those. And is also the leader of our affinity fellowship group for people of color. Izetta was recently one of our lecturers for our Lenten lecture series. You can see her lecture live on YouTube now, or it's live on YouTube now. It's not actually a live lecture anymore. That lecture was a real gift. And so, Izetta, as we come into space, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what the process of preparing for that lecture was like for you, and why the topic felt important.
Absolutely. Good morning, Pastor Will. It's so good to be with you here, and hello, everyone. So the title of the lecture that I did was Song in a Weary Throat, and it was about thinking about both lament and hope, and it comes from someone who I deeply admire, which is Pauli Murray, who spent time in Washington, D.C. working, but also at Howard Law School. And I talk a lot about this book, which you can see I've spent a lot of time with this book. Song in a Weary Throat. And she opens it with a poem that she had published. And I'm just going to read it shortly. It says, "Hope is a crushed stalk between clenched fingers. Hope is a bird's wing broken by a stone. Hope is a word in a tuneless ditty, a word whispered with the wind, a dream of 40 acres and a mule, a cabin of one's own and a moment to rest, a name and place for one's children and children's children at last. Hope is a song in a weary throat." And it felt really important to me because I thought that in that poem, Dark Testament, Murray takes this idea of a lament of no 40 acres and a mule, which is of course a reference to a Civil War promise about land and material goods given to formerly enslaved people that never really materializes, but also what it is to have a home and what it is not to struggle. And then that hope, right, is in a weary throat. So the lament and the hope together. I think that poetry, and poetry specifically by people like Pauli Murray, has really grounded how I think about lament and hope.
Wow. Well, and she's such an interesting character because she's coming at this work from so many different perspectives, as a woman, as a Black person, as a queer person, as an organizer, as a clergy person.
Yes.
How does lament and the experience of intersectional injustice lend itself toward hope?
So I think, poetry is always such a thing that anchors me. And one of my favorite poems of all time is Lucille Clifton's "Come Celebrate With Me." And one of the lines of that is, "Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." And it's speaking very poetically about the role of certainly what we would now call misogynoir, which is a very particular anti-Black sexism directed toward Black women, but very much speaking out of the experience of lament and then saying, but I have survived and I continue to survive. So I think about lament, and the naming of lament is a way that we are present to our experiences. And from being present to our experiences, we're able to imagine otherwise, right? We're able to
Mm,
transform the lament. So, or we carry the lament with us as we are creating transformation. And I think about Murray's work that you keep, even though your throat is weary, is what she's essentially saying. Even though you're in the lament, you're still hoping for otherwise. You've got another song that you're preparing to sing. And I think that that's how I think about those two together, that the structure of lament, particularly from a Black womanist theological perspective, is also one that doesn't stop solely at the appeal, but continues on to transformative justice and action.
right. Well, it's so interesting too, I think, because, and you and I've had many conversations about this. People who are oppressed oftentimes stand in the space between their oppression and justice or relief from their oppression, and are expected to be midwives of that
Mm-hmm.
justice, right? And so, what is it? I'd be curious to know, based on your reading and based on your research, um, what does it mean for those communities, or how do those communities create space that's safe enough for them to both do what they need to do in order to move from injustice to justice, while also
Mm-hmm.
having space to do this lament, because lament is not always a safe thing, right?
It is not always a safe thing, and sometimes lamenting can lead to punishment, because how dare you speak and acknowledge the trauma or the pain or the discontent, right?
Mm.
How dare that be spoken? And yet I think of lament as being part of an arc of transformative justice,
Mm.
that in order to have the thing, the imagining of otherwise, that you must speak the lament, you must speak and acknowledge the harm or the trauma or the feelings, so that you're able to imagine otherwise. And I think also it's appropriate, particularly for groups that are often marginalized or stuck in the vectors of power that disempower people, that those groups have opportunities to have space with one another, to share lament, right? And then find a way to be in community about that, right? So when we're thinking about beloved community isn't solely that, oh, when everything's great, we celebrate. Beloved community is, how do we hold our sorrows together,
Yeah.
right? To me.
Absolutely. I mean, I knew we were having a really fun conversation earlier about queer specific spaces in DC, but I think this broader question of having specific spaces that are safe for Latinx people, for Black people, for queer people, for trans people specifically, even is super important, because it creates that space, right, in which you can bring the fullness of both your joy and lament, and sit in the spaces where those intermingle, or those moments where they intermingle, right?
Mm-hmm. And with people who will understand or share the lament, because I think part of when we hear the call for lament, part of the call is sometimes one of loneliness,
Mm.
um, right? Like am I alone in this lament, right? And I think what is so powerful when I think about justice movements and the lament that rises from those is that it's a lament that is not solo, that it is a group saying, how long, oh Lord, will we have to manage this? So the power of a lament of multiple people saying, this is not working. And how do we make this other? How do we transform this? Is actually a powerful place from which to issue a call of lament.
Yeah. I mean, I remember in your lecture you offered a story, and I'm going to forget the person's name, of a preacher and teacher who Martin Luther King got the image of "I have a dream" from, right? And so, in that space of lament that they were in, the language of lament and hope became not just hers but his. Would you mind telling us that story? And
Yes, Prathia Hall. So Prathia Hall is also someone I deeply admire. When I first thought about this lecture, I went down a rabbit hole of research from Kelly Brown Douglas to Katie Cannon, who is an incredible Black woman theologian, to Polly Murray, but came upon Prathia Hall because Prathia Hall came from she was a PK, a preacher's kid, and her father was a minister in Philadelphia. She had been born and raised in Philadelphia, and then began to participate in the civil rights movement, and initially was reluctant to follow in her father's footsteps, but was a gifted preacher. And it's said that Martin Luther King Jr. once said that she was the one preacher who he would not want to follow, because apparently she was she was electric, right? The way that she could move people. And there were a series of church burnings, and Martin Luther King went south to go to those, and that's where Prathia Hall was, with a gathering of people, and she was asked to speak. And she began with the lament, right, of the terror of what had happened, and then transitioned into the speculative, right, and transitioned into what she hoped would happen, which was a dream of something else. A dream of something different. And so repeating that I have a dream, and then talking about what that dream entailed for racial justice. And King heard it and spoke to her privately about whether or not he could incorporate it. And he begins to incorporate it, so much so that that's how Mahalia Jackson hears him do that riff. And then when he's in that moment on the stage at the March for Washington and there's a lull, Mahalia yells out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And then he begins that sort of off the cuff sort of rhythm of "I have a dream," which is probably one of the most famous speeches in the U.S. history. But it comes out of these, right, Prathia Hall and Mahalia Jackson, right? These two Black women who, out of lament, are saying, "How will you imagine otherwise?"
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too, and I'd love to pivot a little bit and think with you about what it means for people who are actively experiencing lament to also being the people that cast the vision, that participate in the speculative work, that do the dreaming, that actually helps change the world. And what do you think that it is that gives people the freedom to do both of those things at the same time, to sit in the lament, to sit in the grief, to sit in the sorrow, and yet also dream a different kind of dream?
And have a different kind of hope. It's something I always think about. All you need is hope the size of a mustard seed. Right? And that the process of lament, if we think about lament as a process, it's a process that once we get to the end is supposed to remind us of that mustard seed of hope. Yeah. And then if we're reminded of that, might it lend itself to being able to think about transformation? I mean, I think so much of this is about also survival. I'm thinking about Pastor Ginger's sermon on Sunday, where she was quoting Howard Thurman, backs up against the wall, and this idea of a faith intended to help people to survive the grueling impact of empire and disenfranchisement. And so I think that that if we are grounded in the notion of survival and people are committed to their survival, that even from lament comes a move forward, and that we see that certainly with the civil rights movement. We see that with the refusal to be silent because silence equaled death. When we think about sort of resistance to the silence around HIV and AIDS epidemic, that people are often, lament can also sometimes empower you to deep act transformative action when you've also said, I cannot bear anymore, so I must make something else.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the quote that guided our last worship series before the one we're in now. "My feet are tired, but my soul is rested," from Mother Pollard. And this idea that even though she was sitting in a place of deep physical, spiritual lament, right, she yet was there and yet was able to continue moving. And I can't help but think that so much of that can only happen when you are able and willing to share both the honest expression of your sorrow and pain, and have a community that's around you to help you hold that intention with hope, right? Um,
Yeah. And even thinking about the privilege of only lamenting, right?
mm,
Because there are communities for whom the lament must happen with the hope, must happen with the survival, because if you don't do it all together, you may not make it. And so, really thinking about um, what a theology, what a framing of lament and action might mean, right? That it doesn't just stop at the appeal, but that there's some communities who in order to survive must move to transform, to thinking about what kind of transformation can the lament bring, and that the lament might raise issues like once you name something, so once you name racial injustice, once you name homophobia and heterosexism, once you name those things, then and as the source of your lament, you can then begin to transform them.
mm. Yeah, there's power in the naming, right? I mean, we see this again and again and again in Scripture. The power of giving word to something that has hitherto been wordless or denied the space to be named, been denied the space to be named, makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm. I think it does make a difference to name. I think that that's part of what Polly Murray is doing in that poem, right? And is naming the lament, and naming the source of the lament. And then by doing so, not internalizing it, right? Because if you think about internalized oppression, where you're experiencing all of this injustice, and if you internalize it and then begin to believe that you deserve this, or this is because your particular identity, then you internalize it. But by naming it and naming its source, it's also a form of resisting. It's resisting the internalization of this process of oppression, right? To name the lament and name what's happening. And I think I also read from Toni Morrison. It's a piece that I've been just spending a lot of time with, and it's a scene in Beloved where Baby Suggs is in the clearing in a hush harbor, and is essentially preaching and telling people to love your hands, love your necks, love your hearts, love your mouth. And that comes out of a place of, we know they're not loved elsewhere, so you must love yourself, like a restorative practice of care that comes out of the speaking of lament to then give people hope and a reminder of their worthiness.
Wow. That's such a beautiful image, I think, and a reminder too that lament, whether individual or communal, isn't about what my grandmother might call wallowing, right? But rather about embracing the authority and power that we're given as beloved, right? As God's beloved, to receive the full gifts of the transformation that Spirit can work in us and through us in the world, right? I've been thinking a lot lately about my own ordination, and the words that they say when you're ordained, right? Take thou authority. And so what does it mean for us to take thou authority, not just to do justice, so to speak, or to feel joy or whatever it might be, to receive God's grace, but take authority to lament, and receive that as a gift from God, rather than an expression of the brokenness of our world or the brokenness of our lives.
Yeah, what a call to be present too, right? What a call, because lament requires you really, when I think about all the exploration that we've done, it really calls you to also be present, like to the moment and to what one is experiencing. And it also lament, it's really difficult for you to think about avoidance, right? Because if you're naming what you're lamenting from, you also cannot avoid it.
Right.
And when I think about some of the ways we as human beings are trying to navigate our experiences, sometimes avoidance produces its own kind of oppression or negative experiences. But being in lament and saying this is not okay, which sometimes we're really afraid of as a culture. We're really afraid of saying this is not okay, and to like take a moment to sit in the lament, not to rush through it, but to sit in it and say, what is this compelling within me. How am I feeling about that? Is also something really powerful. But I think in doing all of my research, I was so struck by the number of Black feminist approaches and intersectional approaches and womanist theology that was saying, yes, you lament to acknowledge, and then out of that lament, something else will blossom.
Yeah. Well, Azetta, there's so much more to talk about. I feel like, the questions of consumptive lament and the way that one culture will consume the lament of another. We didn't get there today. We didn't get to talk about the way that lament becomes a racialized, sexualized experience, right? And so certain people are denied the freedom to lament. But I know you covered some of that in your lecture.
Yes.
And would love to just let all of you who are watching today know again, if you haven't had a chance to see it, go to YouTube, find Foundry's YouTube page, and look at the classes and lectures section where you'll find Dr. Mobley's lecture, because it was such a gift.
Thank you so much for having me both today and for the lecture. That was such a great opportunity, and it was wonderful to gather with people.
Well, thank you again for being with us. And certainly, I know this won't be the end of the conversation. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And friends, again, I just want to remind you, Izetta, Dr. Mobley's lecture is on YouTube. So please go and watch it along with the previous lectures that we've had over these last couple of weeks. Before we sign off today, I just want to make sure that you know that there are a number of ways that you can be involved and engaged in what's going on here at Foundry in the coming weeks. Our Holy Week services will start off this next Sunday with our Palm Sunday service. You can find out more about that. Our Maundy Thursday service at 7 p.m., our Good Friday Facebook Live with Pastor Ginger at noon and service at 7 p.m., and of course Easter at the link that you'll see on the screen and that we're dropping in the comment section now. We want to make sure that you are staying connected to all of the small groups and classes and events that we've got coming up in this season. We're going to share a few of those specifically, but there's a great little newsletter called Connections that goes out every other week. It's going to have all of that information and all of the Zoom links and that kind of thing in it. We're going to make sure that's in the chat as well if you'd like to sign up for that if you're not already receiving it. And specifically, there are a couple of things coming up we just want to make sure that you know about. We've just made all of our spring and summer classes live. You'll find those at the link that we're going to drop in the comment section. They'll also be lifted in Connections. And so we hope that you'll consider signing up for those. There's some good stuff coming up this summer. We want to make sure that you know that our 2021 Foundry Women's Retreat is coming up on April 16th, 17th, and 18th. We're really excited to be welcoming Reverend Chinda Lee, who is an associate pastor at Fairlington United Methodist Church, as our keynote speaker. And so we hope that you'll consider signing up for that. We do want to make sure, too, that you know that our Spring Great Day of Service, where we'll be packing food on our plaza, socially distanced, of course, and observing all kinds of appropriate protocols, is open for registration as well. That's going to be on Sunday, April 18th. There is a virtual option for that. And so if you would like to participate, but are one of our Foundry from Afar folks, or if you just don't feel comfortable being out and about, you can register for that. And then finally, we want to make sure that you know that next week, we're really excited to welcome the incomparable Mr. Stanley Thurston, our Director of Music Ministries here at Foundry, who will be talking a little bit more about lament and music and his own kind of experience of lament in worship music. So you won't want to miss that either. As always, friends, I am so glad for this chance to be with you today. I hope that you continue to find ways in this season that we're in to take care of yourself. Remember to wear your masks when you're out and about. Sign up for a vaccine if you haven't been able to, or are able to and haven't yet. And make sure that you're staying connected to God and to one another in whatever ways best suit you in this season. Know that God loves you and that we love you. And until next time, keep on wandering toward wonder. Bye for now.